Yo, welcome back everybody to a brand new video here on the second channel, and today we're going to be doing a tier list for the LAIC meta. I just did my top 10 best decks in the format video yesterday on the channel here, and I wanted to kind of give more of an in-depth talk about every deck in the format and where my opinion lies on said deck, and I thought a tier list would be a great way to express my thoughts more on the LAIC format. Of course, LAIC is, well, at the time of uploading this, tomorrow, so I definitely wanted to give my thoughts and takes on everything for LAIC, because I think this is going to be a very big tournament, and I think a tier list gives me a good idea of where to kind of base decks, because the format is pretty diverse right now. There's a lot of decks. Some decks seem better than others. Some decks seem better than they look, and some decks also might be better than people are giving credit for, and I wanted to kind of give my takes and thoughts and everything here in a tier list. And of course, I guess my meta predictions video will be going out tomorrow. Shout out to Brandon here for providing the tier list. I'll leave a link to the tier list down below if you want to go try yourself. And if you are new here to the second channel, make sure to subscribe down below. We're trying to hit 10K subscribers. And if you enjoy the content I post here on the second channel, make sure to click that subscribe button down below and leave a like on the video if you want to enjoy. But let's get into the tier list and give you my thoughts on every deck here. So starting off, we have Lost Zone Charizard EX. Now, Lost Zard definitely does seem like it's probably a rogue deck. I think Lost Zone Charizard takes a bit of a hit because it might struggle into the Iron Hands. Lost Zard also has never been very consistent. That's been my issue with the deck. Its consistency is very flimsy, mainly because you're relying on the Comfy engine as opposed to Pidgeot or even Bibarel, right? So I don't really like Lost Zard that much. I think Lost Zone Charizard EX is probably just worse now. I think it's just it just struggles against Iron Hands, in my opinion. Like, if you don't get turn 2 Charizard and they Iron Hands a Comfy, you're probably not winning the game. I will say, though, Lost Zard does have some cool tricks. Being able to abuse Sableye does help a little bit against Roaring Moon. So there is a debate where maybe this deck could have some niche in the meta right now, but I think Lost Zone Charizard is just a little too flimsy. Not to mention, if you run into, like, Jirachi, right, you're just kind of screwed. Then we got the TM Evo Zard. Probably a solid tier 1 deck. I think TM Bibarel Charizard is cool. I do have some qualms with it. I'm not a huge fan of the deck overall. While I do think its popularity and presence in the format right now is definitely very appealing, I do have some qualms with it. One of my main issues with TM Evo Zard is that it relies heavily on going second. You need to hit the energy combo. You need to, have an Arven. Like, a lot of things need to go your way for TM Evo Zard to work, and that's kind of my main issue with the deck. I'm not, like, super sold on the deck right now. I do think that it's a cool deck, and I think it's actually not bad. I think it's still a pretty solid, like, tier 1 deck right now in the format, but I'm not, like, sold on the deck overall. I think that it does have its weaknesses, and I definitely think that it is easy to just kind of miss a beat with the deck. Because, like, if you're going to fall behind 2 prizes trying to set up your TM Evo, at that point, even though you're using Charizard EX, which likes to fall behind, you don't like falling behind too much because you're still using a 2-prizer that can easily get 1 KO. Like, if you've already given up 2 prizes to Roaring Moon, you're just losing the game at that point because there's, like, almost no way you can win the game with 3 Charizards. And then, of course, we have the Zard Pidgeot deck. I'm a big fan of this deck. I think it's a tier 1.5 deck. I think this deck is very underappreciated and represented right now. Well, it seems like the Bibarel TM Evo Zard deck seems to be the better way to play it. I think Pidgeot is still very good. Pidgeot is still very powerful. Being able to get any card out of your deck every turn is a lot more consistent than Bibarel. One of my issues with the TM Evo deck compared to Pidgeot is when you're using Bibarel, you're drawing like 3 cards, and then you're like, shoot, I whiffed the boss, or my hand is very clogged up right now. I can't thin my hand down. I'm drawing like 1 card with Bibs. Whereas Pidgeot, whatever you need, Pidgeot grabs for you. Now, Pidgeot is a liability because, yeah, it's got a target on its head, but even with that, I think the deck is still fine. I mean, if your opponent is not knocking your Charizard out, it's perfectly fine. Yeah, I think TM Evo Zard is maybe the more popular deck right now, but I think that the Pidgeot Zard deck is still pretty good. I guess its main weakness is going to be it's a bit more weak at a TM Devo. It doesn't have that, like, free reign of, like, having 1 prizers in play before you can put a 2 prizer down, because a lot of the time you're probably going to be using Entei early on and stuff, which I guess can be one of the deck's main weaknesses. Now we got Double Turbo Mew. I think both Bills and Mew are pretty good. I think, honestly, like Charizard, I think Double Turbo Mew is the weaker of the two, because Double Turbo Mew does have, in my opinion, a worse Roaring Moon matchup, where Fusion Mew seems to have a better Roaring Moon matchup, because you can at least go for early Meloetta donks. The Double Turbo build really does rely on, like, your opponent not KOing a 2-prizer turn 1, and Double Turbo Mew doesn't tend to play that many other 1-prizers. Sometimes they'll play, like, an Oricorio, which I guess you can incorporate into the Mew deck, you can play an Oricorio, and you can send Oricorio on the active at the start of your turn, and then it can't get KO'd by Morpeko, so that your opponent's forced to attack it. But I still feel like Double Turbo is the weaker of the two. I will say, though, if you wanted to play Double Turbo Mew this weekend, I think it is the best time to play Double Turbo Mew, literally just because of Spiritomb being non-existent, and Drapion also being kind of non-existent. So we'll see. But yeah, Fusion Mew, I think, is the better of the two right now. It seems to be the stronger Mew deck because turn 1 Donking is very powerful right now. Meloetta is a very good attacker to have in our format. And I think Mew is still just a very good deck right now against a lot of the big decks at the moment. All these EX decks really do lose. I mean, just in general, Mew is one of the better Judge Path decks, and whatever build of Mew you decide to play, I think both of them are still good. I just think Fusion Mew is just slightly better than Double Turbo Mew, obviously. We got Shempao next here. We got the Baxcalibur Shempao deck, I guess, without... I'm assuming this is without the Iron Hands, like the Canadian Shempao deck, which I would probably place in tier 1.5. I actually still don't hate, like, Canadian Shempao. It still is pretty good, in my opinion. Well, you don't have Iron Hands. You also are just a very more, like, linear and straightforward build. You're just using the Shempao with the Baxcalibur. You also get access to Cologne Cross Switcher, which actually could be a lot better right now in our format. So I definitely could see somebody doing well with the Iron Hands-less Shempao deck. I think it's still a solid archetype. But I do think that maybe, you know, Shempao Iron Hands is probably the better deck right now. Iron Hands is just too good. It fixes a lot of your matchups. It is really, really powerful. There is a debate as to which build you could go with, because there is a world where the non-Iron Hands build is stronger, because, again, you're using Cologne and Cross Switcher, which is still pretty good. It almost does something similar to what Iron Hands does with the multi-prize KO. And in a format where Guardy seems to be BDIF right now, it definitely doesn't hurt to have the Cologne Cross Switcher as opposed to Iron Hands. But if you're able to get, like, the turn 2 Iron Hands off with the Shempao deck, I mean, you're just, like, in such a good spot. So I think both builds of Shempao are actually decent right now. I think the Iron Hands one is still probably better because it just has the better time into your worst matchups. But the Canadian Shempao deck still is strong because you can still abuse Cologne Cross Switcher. You don't have to rely on Iron Hands as much. You're just more into the Shempao, which sometimes is all you really need. So yeah, I could definitely see the Canadian build still being decent. So I think that's still, like, honestly a fine deck right now, overall. Next up, we have the Roaring Moon decks. We got the Water Energy build of Roaring Moon. I think both builds of Roaring Moons probably are pretty solid tier 1 decks. Not, like, tier S is probably a little too generous. I don't know if there's, like, a solid tier S deck right now, to be honest. But Roaring Moon definitely seems to be one of the better decks to play right now because you do get access to the speed and the strength of the deck. It's just basically the most aggressive and turbo deck in the format right now. More turbo than even Miraidon was. And Roaring Moon is just going to be very strong. Again, its weaknesses are just it's very easy to play against or play around because it's a very straightforward deck. Roaring Moon is just doing almost the same thing every single game. It doesn't really have any tricks. I mean, yeah, the Water Energy build does give you tricks. I think right now the Water Energy build is probably the best way to play it, obviously. So it's probably, like, the top of tier 1. Then Roaring Moon's behind it. Yeah, I think the Roaring Moon definitely does seem to be at the top of tier 1 right now, for sure. But yeah, Roaring Moon's pretty good. Obviously, it's going to be the most popular deck at LAIC, in my opinion. Whether or not it, wins or does super well is obviously up for debate, but I do think it is going to be the most popular deck for LAIC. It's going to be the most played deck, probably by a decent bit. So definitely expect a lot of Roaring Moon in general. And I think Roaring Moon's pretty strong. I think with how popular it is, I mean, it's just a deck you have to respect, and it seems decent nonetheless. And I think we're still maybe figuring out, how to build Roaring Moon properly, or maybe figuring out, like, the optimal 60 for Roaring Moon, which I think we will probably see after LAIC. That's one of my big predictions, is after LAIC, we're probably going to see what the optimal way to play Roaring Moon will be. So that's, obviously pretty exciting. Next up, we have Goldango. I think Goldango is probably, like, both builds are a solid tier 2 deck. I mean, well, I think Goldango, I'm going to put normal Goldango in Rogue. I think Goldango with Scizor is the better way to play it, obviously. I think it's probably a solid tier 2 deck. Obviously, I didn't put Goldango in my top 10 list. It's most likely outside of the top 10. I'd probably put it, like, number 12 or 11, maybe. Goldango is cool. I actually think it's kind of low-key decent. It's very, like, underrated. It's the best way to put it. The Scizor gives you an early game 1 prizer, and then obviously Goldango doesn't need to put 2 prizers in play unless it has to. But at that point, you do have to put multi-Goldangos in play. But the nice thing with Goldango is you don't have to evolve Goldango until you want to, and then you can kind of start the ball rolling, because once you snowball a knockout, you can snowball multiple KOs. But yeah, I think Goldango's pretty strong. I think being able to KO anything is insane. It's basically... it's kind of like Shenpao without needing to put a stage 2 in play, which is good, though minus you don't get access to the Iron Hands EX. But yeah, no, I think Goldengo is a pretty solid deck still. It's probably still a tier 2 deck. I think we'll definitely see a Goldengo like in day 2. Like I think it's still good enough to like get day 2 to regionals. It's still very strong, and it is able to just kind of blow anything up in its path. The Scizor does help a lot of your matchups. Yeah, Goldengo still seems like a pretty decent deck nonetheless, so I did want to put it somewhere here. We got Miraidon. Miraidon Regieleki is probably just not going to be a thing anymore, but Miraidon, Flaffy, Miraidon, Iron Hands, whatever, is another probable like tier 1 deck, I would say. Like, a lot of these big EX decks are all just kind of like tier 1 archetypes. Like, there isn't really, like, it's hard to say what, like, the best of them all, but I think Miraidon's still decent. It's got a good Shenpao matchup. Its Roaring Moon matchup could be a little sketchy, but I think, like, it's kind of just, like, whoever takes the first 2 prize KO is going to win, and Miraidon is definitely the type of deck that seems to be a little more stable than something like Shenpao or Roaring Moon. Roaring Moon does rely heavily on all these items and Pokestops and kind of just getting, like, turn 1 turbo to kind of carry you, where Miraidon really just has the ability to disrupt your opponent and also put on a lot of attacking pressure with the Miraidons, the Raikus, and, of course, the addition now of Iron Hands makes Miraidon a lot more scarier of a threat. So I definitely think Miraidon's now still like a tier 1 deck. I think it is kind of not slept on because it's weird that its online tournament results haven't really been there, to be honest. But like, I think Miraidon is still just that good of a deck. I think it's still a great play. People are just not playing it for whatever reason, as much as Roaring Moon, obviously. Because I guess Roaring Moon is the new big deck. People want to see how it plays. I think Miraidon is still just really good. I think it's got a lot of good traits about it. It's got a lot of appealing things going for it, which I think keeps it in the conversation, which is why I still have to put Miraidon on here. We got Lost Zone Greninja. I'm not sure what this would classify as. I guess we'll just put that in Rogue. I don't really know what Lost Zone Greninja is. But Lost Zone Charizard, I do think is probably the best way to play Lost Zone right now, and I think it's a decent tier 1.5 deck. So I think the issue with Lost Box right now is ultimately they have weaknesses to some of the big decks, right? Like Iron Hands is a problem. Obviously, if any deck just wants to play Jirachi in their deck, obviously Lost Box is going to suffer. It seems like this Charizard, the Radiant Zard build, is the best way to play Lost Box right now because you do get access to Radiant Zard, which does give you a really good one-prize attacking presence into these threats like Iron Hands, and it's just also a really good beat stick, and the deck does play like TM Devolution. Again, its main issue is ultimately going to be like the Jirachi. Jirachi is going to be a big hindrance for the Radiant Charizard build, and I also think Iron Hands is a problem. Like, Lost Box isn't perfect right now. It has all these big hurdles, and also you still have to deal with like the Ionos and stuff in the format, and like even Judge Path, which can be an issue. So Lost Box isn't perfect. I would want to play Lost Box or put it higher, on the ranking, but it does have a lot of weaknesses right now in our format, which do hold it back a little bit, but it's still, like, solid. I still think Lost Box can do well. Like, I'm not saying the deck's dead in the water or anything, but I just think that it has a lot of weaknesses right now that really do hold it back from keeping it at the top of the table. Lost Zone Kyogre, I kind of want to put in tier 1.5. Now, my issue with Lost Zone Kyogre is Kyogre does take a bit of a hit, once again, to both Jirachi and Iron Hands. Iron Hands is very annoying because the thing with Kyogre is if Kyogre gets a lot of extra turns, like if you're playing the Zam build, right, you get the few extra turns with the Zam because you're not using 2 prizers, you're able to Kyogre a lot more easily. But when you're, giving up 2 prizes to an Iron Hands all of a sudden, Kyogre just becomes a lot weaker. But I actually think Kyogre is still great. One thing with Kyogre that I will say is with decks like Roaring Moon and Miraidon and Mew VMAX still being very popular, Kyogre still seems like a great play to beat those decks. That's the one thing I'll say about Kyogre. It has a good matchup against these big basic EX decks, and if somebody can figure out a good way to play Kyogre that can handle the Iron Hands, can handle the Jirachis, I think Kyogre is going to be that good of a deck. Obviously, you have other issues, like Jirachi Manaphy is an issue. Even if they're not playing Iron Hands, Jirachi Manaphy is annoying because you can't set up damage with Sableye to then KO with Kyogre. So it does have weaknesses to get over and hurdles, but I do think Kyogre is really good. I mean, just the idea of being able to KO like 2 Roaring Moons at the end of the game seems like it's kind of insane. So I really do think Kyogre is still very good. It seems like Kyogre has probably one of the best Roaring Moon matchups right now, mainly because all you have to do is take 2 prizes, and then you can just sit there and just work towards the Kyogre. A lot of Roaring Moonless don't even play Iono right now, so it's very easy just to use Kyogre against Roaring Moon. So I think Kyogre is really good right now. With all these big basic decks running around. Kyogre seems good. People just have to figure out the best way to play it, the best way to crack it, the best way to get over the many hurdles that it has to face right now with Iron Hands and Jirachi kind of getting in the way. Lost Zone Roaring Moon's kind of cool. I'll put it as a tier 2 deck. I do like the idea of Roaring Moon and Lost Box. It's a really good attacker because it almost fixes a lot of its issues. Like, Roaring Moon is really good into, like, Charizard, Mew VMAX, like, any big threat that even something like Dragonite or Raikou couldn't get over, you can just use Roaring Moon with. Roaring Moon is also a pretty tanky Pokemon in the mirror match. It's got 230 HP. It doesn't damage your own bench. 230 HP is a lot of health to have. You can discard stadiums. You even just have the Insta-KO delete option if you really need it. For now, I'm going to put it in tier 2. I do think this deck is underrated, and I think somebody might make a good Roaring Moon Lost Zone deck, potentially at LAIC, and this deck actually could be higher on the tier list in coming days, but for now, I'm going to put, like, Lost Zone Roaring Moon as, like, the Goldengo. Like, it's a cool deck. I think people might play it. It might get day 2, and somebody might figure out kind of a great way to play it, but obviously I think it's just not as good as, like, the normal Roaring Moon decks, but it is a really cool deck nonetheless, and I think it does have a lot of potential in the meta right now. Lost Zone Dragonite's probably tier 2. I mean, Dragonite isn't bad right now. You could honestly even put Dragonite at, like, tier 1.5, but I guess, like, the Lost Zone Dragonite build might struggle more into, like, maybe the 2 prize matchups. I don't know. I think Dragonite's, like, fine right now. Just much like Roaring Moon, it's kind of just, like, it's cool, right? Lost Zone Goodra, I think, is dead. Goodra is just not good right now. Goodra just cannot beat stuff like Roaring Moon. Roaring Moon is just too hard for Goodra to get over. Goodra could be good into, like, maybe stuff like, you know, the other Lost Zone decks, Miraidon maybe, but even then, like, Goodra just seems kind of underwhelming when you just get killed by Roaring Moon, and even Shempow is tough, because not only do they have Iron Hands, but they also can just Shempow your Goodra pretty easily, so I don't think Goodra's great right now. I think it's just kind of a rogue deck. I don't think we'll see Goodra do well. I think Goodra's time in the limelight is kind of dwindled away at this point. Iron Valiant. All right. Iron Valiant Urshifu is probably tier 2. I think the deck is cool. Being able to potentially capitalize on your opponent getting a basic turn 1 and being able to turn 1 Yoga Loop is ridiculous. This definitely feels like a combo-based deck that if somebody kind of figures out a great 64, this actually seems like it could be a decent deck in the format. It might be better than Rapid Strike Inteleon, to be honest with you. So I kind of want to put that in tier 2. The Entei build might be a tier 1.5 deck. Iron Valiant does seem like it's got the potential. It's got the weird results. It does also seem like it's got the most polarizing matchup spread right now. But the Entei build, I think a lot of people can agree, is the best way to play the Iron Valiant deck. And I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a couple Iron Valiant Enteis in day 2. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw, like, a completely different way to play Iron Valiant in day 2. Iron Valiant Jolteon, I'm probably going to put in Rogue. I know this deck has some online tourney results, and it does have a lot of really cool plays it can make, but ultimately I don't think it's going to be popular enough or well-respected to play. But I do think the Jolteon build is cool. There is some things you can do with it, and I mean, I'd like to see this deck be a thing in the format. I think it is probably just a worse Rapid Strike, which is why I'm going to put in Rogue, but I think it's still a cool deck nonetheless, and I'm not saying that it's bad or anything. Then we got to talk about, I guess, wait, there's another Iron Valiant deck. Hold on, wait, there's another one. There's Zatu. I think that's Rogue. There is some potential for Zatu, Iron Valiant, because you can attack with the Valiant. Valiant's not actually that bad of an attacker. Zatu, you know, gives you a draw engine. That's one of the things that really hurts Iron Valiant, is it doesn't really seem to have good draw. Like, a lot of the time, Valiant can just lose to, like, a really bad Iono in the late game. Sometimes you just can't draw supporters in general. That seems to, like, Iron Valiant's biggest weakness, where with Zatu, you do have a draw engine in the deck, so you actually have ways to play the game, which I think is kind of cool. Like, if Iron Valiant gets to play the game, the deck legit could be broken. So, I don't know. Zatu, Iron Valiant, just hasn't been explored or played enough for me to call it any higher than a Rogue deck. Next up is Lugia. I think Lugia is a very sleeper deck in the format right now. So, I think, I don't see Iron Hands Lugia on here. There's no Iron Hands Lugia. Okay, well, we'll say this. We'll say, right, can I add? Wait, I might be able to add. Can I add something to here? I don't think I can. No, I can add. Okay, hold on. I'm going to add a file real quick. Yeah, very professional. I know. I was going to add a Lugia. Yeah, give me a sec. Just got to find where it is. All right, where is it? Lugia, Iron Hands, where you at? I'm going to add that. Okay, I wanted to add Lugia Iron Hands to this tier list because I think this is actually something people got to play. Because I think there is Colorless Lugia, there's Lugia Iron Hands, and there's Single Strike Lugia. Those are the 3 ways to play it. So Colorless Lugia, I think honestly it might just be Rogue. I think Colorless Lugia is just kind of, it's okay right now. It's kind of just, it is what it is. I wouldn't be surprised if one got day 2. That's kind of where a lot of the decks in the Rogue category are. It's like, I wouldn't be surprised if said deck did get day 2. And I think Colorless Lugia is the weakest version of Lugia right now. It's not terrible, don't get me wrong. I just think it is the weakest build at the moment. I do think that Iron Hands Lugia is actually decent. I think it's a solid tier 1.5 deck, maybe even a tier, not tier 1, but probably tier 1.5. Single Strike Lugia is also not bad. I'm going to put that in tier 2. This is another deck that I think is very underrepresented right now. Single Strike Lugia seems decent. I mean, it's got a lot of good things going for it. You have the Tyranitar, which trades really well into a lot of these 2-prizers. You have the Stonejourner Evoltals, which are still good right now. I think one of the things Lugia is going to have a hard time getting over right now in general, though, is probably just going to be like Screamtail, because like Archeops is just going to get sniped by the Gardevoir Screamtail combo. So I don't know. I think Lugia is still very good. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw somebody do really well with Lugia, because I think Lugia is just a deck nobody's thinking of right now, nobody's respecting, nobody's really considering when metagaming right now. I think everyone's like, oh, it's got to be Charizard, Roaring Moon, Mew, Chien-Pao, Miraidon, even like sometimes Lost Zone decks, but I'm going to tell you right now, people are kind of sleeping on Lugia. I think Iron Hands Lugia is the best way to play it. It's actually not a bad deck. I think it's tier 1.5. I think the deck has a lot of cool plays it can make. Actually, you know what? I'm going to move Colorless Lugia up to tier 2. I think Colorless and Single Strike are both tier 2. That is a lie. I think they're both actually tier 2. Putting them in Rogue, putting Colorless Lugia in Rogues feels kind of bad. I don't think Colorless Lugia is like the best way. I think it's weaker than Single Strike. If I had to play any Lugia decks, I would probably play Iron Hands first, Single Strike second, and then Colorless third. Colorless is okay. It just feels like a weaker version of the Iron Hands deck, but it's still not terrible. But I think at that point just play Iron Hands, because like you just have Vessels and you can use Charizard earlier than having to rely on Luminous Energy, right? So there's more advantages to that. Single Strike also just seems good. I actually think Single Strike is really underappreciated right now. I think nobody's really respecting it. I think the issue overall with Lugia is, yeah, it's probably just going to have a bad matchup into like Charizard, and Guardy could be tough if you're not maybe teching for like playing Manaphy or something, but I think Lugia is still just fantastic. I think it's very underrepresented right now. Arc Piles. Arcdura's bad. Arc Gudra's bad. I hate it, dude. I love Arc, man. Arc is like one of my favorite decks of all time, but Arc Piles really struggle right now against a lot of these top decks. Like, for example, the 3 big EX basic decks, Arc is just gonna have a bad matchup against. Roaring Moon is a bad matchup. Miraidon's always been shaky, and Chien-Pao's also been shaky for Arc Piles. Arc can play Judge Path, I guess, but again, is Judge Path going to be enough to beat these decks? Maybe. Like, Roaring Moon, yeah, you can beat Roaring Moon with Judge Path, but my issue with Arc Piles is that, like, if Arceus just gets donked by Roaring Moon, like, so for example, Arc always wants to go first. You never want to go second with Arceus, because the advantage you get of being able to go first, attach energy, evolve V-Stars too good. So you're going second against Roaring Moon, or first against Roaring Moon, you go Arc Energy, attach, pass, and they just donk your Arceus. If you don't have another Arceus in play, you're probably just losing that game at that point. So, like, that's my issue. And also any big Pokemon like Duraludon or Flying Pikachu. Well, Flying Pikachu's not that bad, but like Dura or Gudra, you want to play, like, you just can't use against Roaring Moon, because Roaring Moon just instantly deletes them. And Chien-Pao's also just been a tough matchup. If Chien-Pao is able to draw out of, like, a path or something, Chien-Pao just gets through Arceus very easily. And Miraidon's also been a sketchy matchup, because they can donk you turn 1. They have a lot of bulk, because you can't kill the Miraidons very easily. Yeah, Arc's always struggled against those big decks. But I will say, I think there is potential for an Arceus. I don't think Arc Dur or Arc Gudra are any good right now. I do think somebody's going to come up with a cooler Arc Pile. I think there is potential for an Arc Pile, but I just don't think Arc Piles are just as good as they could be. But if I were to, like, I don't know what the Arc Pile would be. Like, if somebody makes a good Arc Pile for LAIC and does well with it, it could be a tier 2 deck. Like, I think there is potential for an Arc Pile deck to do well. I just don't think the Arc Dura is it right now. Because also Lugia is not popular enough to play a Duraludon. Now that they're playing Basic Energy too, like, what's the point? So, yeah, I mean, Arc Piles I want to be good, but I just don't think they're that good right now. I think there is room for one. I just have to figure out, you have to make an Arc Pile that can beat Roaring Moon, Chien-Pao, and Miraidon without struggling, basically. Rapid Strike's probably Rogue. I think Rapid Strike Inteleon's actually not bad right now. With, like, the popularity of Guardy, it's good. My issue with Rapid Strike is just, there isn't enough respect for, like, the Lost Zone. And not to mention, I don't know if Rapid Strike's matchup against Roaring Moon is very good. I guess, like, the theory is that Roaring Moon will Frenzy Gouging a VMAX, take 3 prizes, and that'll put them in range of, like, Yoga Loop and stuff. My issue is, all Roaring Moon has to do is knock out 2 VMAXs and the game's over. Like, I just don't know if Rapid Strike can keep up with Roaring Moon, even if you can take advantage of, like, Yoga Loop after they Frenzy Gouging you. I just don't know if it's possible. I guess, like, the Chien-Pao matchup might not be too bad. Miraidon seems like it's okay, too. I don't know. Rapid Strike seems like it's a rogue deck right now. I just definitely feel like it's a worse version of Iron Valiant. Like, if I'm going to put effort into one of these like damage manipulation Yoga Loop decks, I would probably just rather play like a build of Iron Valiant instead of Rapid Strike. Cloth, ironically, I think Cloth is tier 2. I actually don't think Cloth is that bad of a deck. One of the things that makes Cloth so good is that it hits a lot of relevant decks for weakness, and also can attack on the first turn of the game. All things that are very important to note when playing Cloth. Like, I think, like, a Cloth deck actually is going to get day 2. I would not be surprised if we saw a couple Cloth in day 2. The deck is, like, it's that good. It being able to KO something on the first turn of the game is very good. You have relevant typing into a lot of the big decks right now. Basically, this deck trades well into Roaring Moon, Charizard, I think even Shempao, and obviously Miraidon seems good. All 4 of those decks, Cloth seems to have a good matchup against. My issue with Cloth, it's probably going to struggle against, like, Goldango. It's going to struggle against probably Lost Box, obviously. You're probably going to struggle against Mew unless you're playing Drapion. And I also think that Gardevoir is not the easiest matchup. But if Cloth is hitting the big EX decks, Cloth is just having a field day due to its typing and the ability to do like 230 with Electrode pretty easily against other things like Shempao and stuff. So I actually kind of like Cloth. I definitely think that it's not that bad of a deck right now. I can't put in Rogue. Zorobox, I'm going to put in tier 2. I'm a big fan of this deck. I think Zorobox is actually also a little underrepresented right now. Zorobox has the ability to counter a lot of the top decks in the format. It has the ability to do a lot of things. It feels very good. You also now have a fixed Lost Zone matchup thanks to Manaphy and Jirachi. It makes Lost Box very easy to beat because if you just put like Scizor or Cleaver in the active against Lost Box and have Manaphy and Jirachi in play, they're going to really struggle to take knockouts. It's really good. And I think Zorobox is a very powerful deck right now. I think it's a decent tier 2 deck. I think it's basically like, it's like where Cloth is right now in my opinion. Dialga, Magnezone's probably Rogue. It's a cool deck, and I'd love to see it do day 2. I mean, it seems like Dialga sometimes just randomly does get day 2s, but we'll see. Spidops Venomoth, I think, is also dead right now. I don't think the deck is actually that bad. Like, in theory, it actually might not be that bad against, like, Shempao, Charizard, maybe even Roaring Moon. I guess, like, Charizard TM Evo is kind of bad because they can TM evolve around the item lock. But I mean, you do have grass attackers, and Confusion's pretty good. Actually, you know what? Okay, this is obviously a rogue deck. I don't think Spidops Venomoth is like a tier 2 deck or anything like that. But actually, in theory, this actually doesn't seem like that bad of a deck right now. I'm like actually thinking about it more. It actually doesn't seem that bad of a deck. But with like the decline of Lost Zone variants, is it really that good? I don't know. It actually doesn't seem like a bad deck though, ironically enough. Garchomp's also rogue. Drago's rogue. I would love to see Drago do well. Zoroark V-Star's rogue. Pelk is obviously rogue. Snorlax is definitely probably tier 1.5 right now. Heading into the tournament, I think Snorlax is definitely a decent tier 1.5 deck in our meta for sure. I definitely think that it is strong. People don't really like. Personally, if I'm going to LAIC, I'm not teching for Snorlax. I don't think it's popular enough, but I think we're definitely going to see Snorlaxes in day 2. People are going to hit Snorlax and be like, I should have tech for it, or they might not know what to do against it. I also think Snorlax is good into like some decks, like obviously pretty good against stuff like Shempao and Charizard, especially being probably your best matchup. And with like Lost Zone not being like insanely popular right now, it's pretty good for Snorlax. I definitely think Snorlax is in a great spot right now still. I just don't think it's going to be that popular, and due to it not being popular, people aren't going to tech for it. Reggie's is also rogue. I love Reggie's though. Lost Tina is also tier 1. Definitely Lost Tina seems like a pretty good tier 1 deck right now. I'm not a big fan of the deck personally, but I do think that it's popular enough. There are people that do play it right now that will say that it is actually that good of a deck. It does seem like the best way to play the Lost Zone engine that's not using only one prizers, obviously like Radiant Charizard or Kyogre or whatever. But yeah, I definitely think that Lost Tina is a solid tier 1 deck right now. It's probably behind Miraidon, to be honest. Like, I would still say Miraidon's a better deck than Lost Tina. Lost Tina sometimes loses to itself. It has really bad draw sometimes, but it can keep up into these 2 prize matchups, and having Sableye is nice, right? So it ain't bad. And not to mention it does play Path, which is also important. And then finally we have Guardy. I can't, like, the thing is, I don't know if there's a tier S deck right now. There really isn't any deck that's in tier S. I think Guardy's just probably the best deck right now. It's at the top of the tables in tier 1. There you go. That's my prediction right now. Is Guardy is top of the tables, a tier 1 deck. I don't think Guardy's S tier or anything. Like, I do think the deck is really good. It's, in my opinion, the BDIF in the format, but I don't think Guardy is any higher than tier 1 at the moment. But I definitely do think that it's the best deck. I just don't think there's no S tier deck right now. There is no deck that is beyond good and better than anything else. It's just Guardy's it's a pretty good tier 1 deck. That's my take on Gardevoir right now. It does seem like the hype is extremely exploded right now, but I don't know if like Guardy's like that good. It's not tier S. I don't think it's as good as it was for NEIC, for example. But there you go. That is my tier list for LAIC. Let me know what you think of my opinions down below in the comments. Do you think I maybe underranked a deck or something. I don't know. I don't think there's any decks that were really missed out on this list. Like, there's no crazy surprise. I guess there's like Bayonet, which was another deck from last format. Bayonet would obviously be in Rogue. I think Bayonet just is worse now because Roaring Moon just probably farms it. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, this seems like a decent tier list, and I think that I hope my opinion was valid enough. I do think we're going to see some surprises. Like, I think we'll see some Lugias in day 2. I think we'll see a Kyogre deck break through in this tournament. That's why I'm putting it so high, because I think Kyogre legit is good. Again, with all these big basic EX decks that don't run Mana Fee, Kyogre is just looking to rub its hands and looking to farm some Roaring Moons. But we just have to figure out the best way to play Kyogre so that it can combat its weaknesses. But there you go. That's my tier list. Let me know what you think of it down below. Leave a link to the tier list down below if you want to go try it yourself. That'll be it for me. Hopefully you enjoyed the video here on the second channel. And I'll see you all very soon for another video. Bye-bye.